You ever stop and wonder how the global economy really works? I mean, beyond the daily headlines and the stock market chaos, there's this hidden architecture, right? An invisible system of rules, money, and power that literally shapes the fate of entire countries. So, okay, let's dive into that. Let's map out this machine that runs the world.
In this quote, it just gets right to the heart of what we're talking about here. See, this isn't about some shadowy conspiracy with secret meetings. Nope. It's about a system. A system with built-in rules, incentives that end up creating dependency and control. And it's all happening right out in the open. So the big question is, how is this thing actually structured?
Well, it all starts with the big names we've all heard of, right? The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. Their official mission, right after World War II, was actually pretty straightforward. Create a stable global economy and help promote development in places that needed it most. Sounds good, right?
But what started as this noble goal to stabilize things has, well, it's evolved. And what's so fascinating here is the shift. These institutions, they became tools of structured influence. And you might ask why? It's simple, really. Because in this system, power isn't about one country, one vote. Power equals capital. The more cash a country puts in, the more say it gets, plain and simple.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, let's think of it like a stack. A four-layered stack of global governance. Each layer has its own job, but the key is they all work together, just perfectly.
So right at the bottom, we've got Layer 1, the monetary and financial core. This is the absolute bedrock of the whole system. We're talking about the IMF, the World Bank, and of course the big central banks like the US Fed or the ECB. These guys control the flow of money, they handle the emergency lending, and they basically set the fundamental financial rules for the entire planet.
All right, moving up to Layer 2. On top of all that money, you need rules for how it's all traded, right? That's the trade and rules layer. And the main player here is the World Trade Organization, or WTO. They're the ones setting the terms for how everything, goods, services, moves across borders. They're literally writing the rulebook for global business.
Now, Layer 3 is all about political legitimacy, what you might call the soft power framework. This is where the United Nations and its agencies come in. The UNDP, the WHO, UNICEF. They handle development, global health, humanitarian aid, all the stuff that gives this whole system a stamp of global approval and cooperation.
And finally, we get to Layer 4, and this one's a biggie, private power. We're talking about the giant global banks, the credit rating agencies you hear about, like Moody's and S&P, and these massive institutional investors. Now, these aren't governments, but let me tell you, their decision to lend money, or pull it out, or downgrade a country's credit, that can have way more impact than any political speech.
So here's where it all comes together. These four layers aren't just sitting there separately. No way. They create what you could call a closed governance loop. It's self-reinforcing. Think about it. The financial core gives out the loans. The WTO sets the trade rules that make those loans work. The UN gives the whole thing a stamp of legitimacy. And the private markets? They enforce the financial discipline. It's a perfect, closed system.
So how does this whole system actually, flex its muscles? How does it exert its influence? Well, it really boils down to one core mechanism: the price of a loan. When a country is in deep trouble and needs a bailout, there are always strings attached.
And that fine print, those strings attached, they have a specific name: conditionality. It's simply the set of policy changes that a country has to agree to make if they want to get the cash. Make no mistake, this is the central lever of power in the entire architecture.
So what do these conditions actually look like in the real world? Well, they usually fall into four big buckets. First up, you've got fiscal austerity. That means cutting government spending, often on really sensitive things like fuel or food subsidies. Second, structural reforms. This is a big one. It means privatizing state-owned companies and slashing regulations. Third, a change in monetary policy, usually hiking interest rates to fight inflation. And fourth, trade liberalization. Cutting tariffs and opening up your markets to foreign competition.
Now, to be fair, the official reason for all this makes sense on paper, right? It's to make sure the loan gets paid back and to get the economy stable again. But the critical view, the other side of the coin, is that these policies force incredibly rapid, often painful changes on the population. They can ignore the massive social costs and, maybe most importantly, they seriously limit a country's freedom to decide its own economic future. Okay, that's enough theory. The real question is, does this actually play out in the real world? Let's stop talking hypotheticals and look at the actual data, from the front lines, from countries that have been through this exact process. Minus 25%.
I'm just going to let that number hang in the air for a second. That was the approximate shrinkage of Greece's entire economy, its GDP, after its bailout program. A program that was built from the ground up on severe austerity conditions.
Okay, now let's look at Pakistan. This is a textbook case of what you might call the repeated borrower model. Just look at this chart. Do you see a pattern here? It's crisis, then an IMF loan, crisis, then another IMF loan. And the conditions are almost always the same. Devalue your currency, cut your subsidies, tighten your budget. It's a cycle of borrowing that can create a state of, well, near-permanent dependency.
And then you have Argentina, the IMF's largest client. In 2018, they got the biggest loan in the fund's entire history, a mind-boggling $57 billion. And yet, even with these absolutely massive cash injections, the core problems, the economic instability, it's all persisted. It just leads to another cycle of crisis and having to restructure everything all over again.
And let's circle back to Greece for a second, because this table really shows you how it happened. Look at this. 3 massive bailouts, and each one demanded deeper and deeper cuts. Cuts to pensions, cuts to wages, cuts to public services. And the result? It was that shocking 25% drop in the economy we talked about a minute ago, not to mention skyrocketing unemployment. This is the real-world cost of conditionality.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Is this all some grand, deliberate conspiracy run by so-called economic hitmen in secret? Well, the evidence actually points to something more nuanced, and frankly, something much more powerful.
You see, the hitman story is all about intentional, secret manipulation, but the reality is much more about structural pressure. It's the system itself, driven by its own rules. The pressure isn't some guy in a back room making threats. It just emerges when a country feels like it has no other choice. And the control, it's not personal, it's written right there in black and white, in the loan conditions for the whole world to see.
So after all this, what's the big takeaway? What's the most crucial thing to understand here?
It's these global institutions, this whole invisible architecture, it's not a neutral system. It can't be. It reflects the distribution of power in the world, and in doing that, it shapes who rises, who struggles, and who remains dependent. It creates a playing field where the rules themselves often decide the outcome. And just understanding that system, seeing that architecture, that's the first real step to seeing how the world actually works.